Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of CN Unit Analysis, we are taking a look at the latest and first ever version 3 sustained Hyacine. So today we have really taken a look at our kit in the early access server, as well as all of the different content will be coming up. I just want to go through with you guys a little bit more of the calculations, specifically for the Eidolons, signature light cones, and how she's going to be performing in Castorice, My Day, Blade Team, etc, etc. So without further ado, let's get into today's content. Alright, first things first, overall summary for Hyacine, she's going to be the fastest unit ever in honkaistarrail. In fact, she's one of the few units that can actually easily achieve a 200 speed, especially with the latest 4-piece and 2-piece on top of the Herda storage signature light cone. So just a very fast unit, which is going to be directly tied to the outgoing healing. On top of that, we are going to be getting a 1200 HP buff to your entire team, raising the overall sustain as well as comfort for anybody that is going to be running Hyacine, especially if you're going to be getting hit. Right? On top of this, you're also going to be getting a little bit of the additional heal in the form of the Ica. So as long as you're talking about just a sustained perspective, she's going to be that much comfortable compared to a lot of our version 1 as well as version 2 sustains. Now, besides from the overall sustain itself, in terms of cleanse as well as sub DPS from Ica, it is basically a de facto upgrade for a lot, especially when compared to if you're still going to be using, in this case, the 5-star Bailu. You'll feel the difference, especially for players that do not have a version 3 limited sustain, right? In the current version, in terms of sustain, she's going to be one of the best in all of the abundance units, but in terms of cleansing, she's going to be a little bit worse compared to Lingsha. For the skill point positivity, it sort of depends who she's going to be running with, because we're really running the Castorice team, she's always going to be skill point negative, and other teams may be a little bit more positive, right? So if you combine this with the fact that she's going to be on a very high 200 speed, if you're okay with not having 100% uptime on the ultimate, then she can actually generate a lot of skill points, especially if you do not intend to use her with outside of the Castorice team, right? So aside from this, it's going to be roughly a 16% overall damage increase for Castorice, 19% overall damage increase for My Day, as well as a 23% overall damage increase for 3B. But keep in mind, there's going to be a very important thing to know here. You can see why is it so low for Castorice, in fact even lower than My Day, is because something that's not into consideration here for now is how fast does Hyacine charge up Castorice products, which we're going to be taking a look in the numbers as well. And then for Blade, it's going to be a 17% overall final damage increase. For all of these numbers, we're going to be taking a bit later. So generally speaking, in terms of output, you are also going to be a 240% damage run from Ica, converting your outgoing healing into damage output. So in the team comp of Castorice, RMC, 3B, as well as Hyacine, you are roughly 70% of 3B's personal damage output, computing to roughly 10%. Right over here, 10% of the entire team's output. So it's roughly 70% of 3B, 10% of the entire team in a Castorice team comp. So for a sustain slot, this amount of damage is honestly very nice, especially when compared to all of our previous sustains, which pretty much deal mostly negligible damage for the entire time, right? So generally speaking, if you're somebody that still lacks a version 3 sustain, in fact any limited sustain, or if you're going to be a Castorice main, she's going to be a very easy pull for you guys. Are you running low on Hyacine funds? Well, worry not, because LD Shop is here. Developed by LD Player Emulator, a former game top-up platform, LD Shop offers HSR top-ups up to 29%. All you need is your server and game ID and you're all set. It's safe, reliable, and almost instant, as you can see from this process here. Simply take a look at the prices of the items in-game and LD Shop like Express Pass and 8080 on-rate shards. Currently, there's a further 5% discount on 8080 shards available 1 day before the version update. Users registered using my link will also receive a 15% and 5% off coupon, which can save you a maximum of $50. First top-up bonuses can also be activated, and spending over 80 USD will gain you VIP, which rewards you with a free supply pass. Check out the link in the description. Top up now. So after discussing Hyacine's overall advantages and kit, we are going to be talking a little bit about Hyacine's disadvantages, as well as basically some of the points that she's not going to be shining too bright. Because after all, in version 3.4, we are going to be getting the Fake Collab, which we will be getting a free Archer, but we do need to pull for Saber, as well as Phynon being the only version 3.4 unit. And if you guys are already pulling for Cypher, then that's going to be another unit of concern, right? So what exactly are going to be some of the downsides? The first of which is going to be the 140 energy cost. So if you're going to be using a purely basic attack damage output, which is quite unlikely if you're going to be running here with Castorice, you are going to be facing a 33 energy deficiency, and even if you're going to be spamming your E the entire time, you are going to be lacking 3 energy over here. So even if you don't want to consider the fact that you're going to be getting hit on kind of stuff, it is not guaranteed that you're going to be getting the 100% ultimate outtime, which you can also probably see a lot of times if you're going to be using Hyacine for the past 2 days. Sometimes during her turn, the ultimate buff actually goes away, which means that during her turn itself, if you do not have the ultimate buff, that time when you use your basic or the skill is actually actually not going to lead to a E-cast follow-up attack, which can be pretty annoying because some of these things is beyond your control. It really just depends on how often does Hyacine or Ica get hit, so something to consider over there. Second thing is gonna be the auto battle is a little bit sus, because if you're gonna be pairing up Hyacine with Castorice, then this auto battle is actually very straightforward, because he's just gonna be spamming skill the entire time. But if you're gonna be running Hyacine outside of Castorice in other team comps, this means that even if your entire team is very healthy, so for example, you can see over Jiao Qiu, Silver with Aggron, they're very healthy, she will still continuously to spam skill, which in this case is basically completely useless because you don't really need to spam heals for any other teams outside of Castorice, which could be a little bit annoying for casual player base who wants to use her on a free full auto team comps clearing the daily content, right? So if they're out of the way, this is going to be the pool recommendation for Castorice owners. This is going to be a 16% damage increase as well as a 15% cycle increase, right? So this is going to be directly tied to Pollux's Newbud generation and how quickly can you rotate and cycle out of Pollux. And on top of that, we are also bringing a 8% damage from Hyacine herself for a grand total of 30% overall final damage increase, closing to potentially even 50% final damage increase alongside Castorice. So for players who are considering whether she's going to be worth for Castorice, then the answer is absolutely yes. It is close enough to even match up to an E1 Rame or an E0 S0 Tribi. The biggest benefactor at this point is basically if you're going to be putting Hyacine with Castorice, you can actually potentially even give Tribi to the D-Hera team slot and just let this run alongside of a Rame team to make Castorice work. Now that being said, if you are going to be using Rame with Castorice, there are a couple of things to consider that might be not too good, which is, for example, the extended break as well as the break efficiency. It is technically a negative benefit since you don't really want enemies to be immobile. You want them to hit you as much as possible, so that is something to take into consideration. But other than that, the synergy between Castorice as well as Hyacine is going to be absolutely one of, if not the best synergy that we have seen in version 3 so far. Now, the difference between Hyacine's Light Cone as well as Signature 1, I would say that they are very similar, but the Signature Light Cone is going to be a little bit easier to obtain because it's going to be a lower PD as well as 25. But the overall benefit, the Eidolon one is going to come out slightly ahead, especially in a Castorice team. So if you are going to be feeling a little bit lucky, you can see over here, you can try pulling for the E1 for yourself first, right? For the E2, even though this 30% speed buff is quite nice, it is a lot of investment just for E2, so might want to consider getting the S1 first before even considering the E2 S1, right? Note to self, in the remaining teams, for Blade, it is going to be a 70% personal damage increase, but Blade's personal multipliers are already that low, so even with a 70% final damage buff, it's not going to be that game-changing unless we see that version 3 before it's going to be a lot stronger for Blade himself, right? Because you have seen from the recent Memory of Chaos updates, Blade himself, he has seen a little bit of a comeuppance, so maybe by 3.4, when he does get a rework, the potential upgrade to Blade could be a little bit more substantial. And then same thing for another HP scaling DPS is going to be My Day, even though we do have a damage increase, but the rotation is going to be lower as compared to Castorice. So you can see that the final damage increase is going to increase, but unfortunately, because her single target heal is not going to be as strong, you might want to even consider pulling for an E1 My Day instead of an E0 as your Hyacine, so it's not too recommended to pull, right? And then for D-Hera teams, you want to replace Gallagher and Luocha. I would say, generally speaking, in terms of overall comfort and sustain, just from the healing values alone, it is going to be not too bad, but generally speaking, not too big of a game-changing sustain pool compared to a unit such as Castorice, right? If you do not have a Lingsha, you could consider pulling this just for a D-Hera. So not really like a vertical investment, but it's a little bit like an alternative option for you guys. And then for an Aggron team, you pretty much almost absolutely have to get the E0 S1 because without the S1, you can't generate any debuffs for Aggrons to stack on her slash streams over here. Without the Cylinder Lycon, I think this is going to be completely fine because we do have the Hurrah Lycon, which is going to come very close to what the Cylinder Lycon has to offer, at least in terms of speed performance. So generally speaking, there are no other alternatives outside from Hurrah Cylinder Lycon. This is pretty much the best in slot, and you don't really have to think about anything else because it perfectly synergizes with Hyacine's entire kit. You can see over here, if you were to take away Hurrah Cylinder Lycon, you are going to be losing a lot more speed, and which means that you're going to be facing a lot more relic pressure, right? You have a lot more quality on your relics to actually get to 200 speed for Hyacine, which can be very difficult to obtain, especially for players that are trying to speed chase for the past 2 years, right? On top of that, you really want to hit a 200 speed of Hyacine. You want to get a match HP buff, so not too much of a negotiation here. Just get the Hurrah Lycon as the alternatives for the E0 S0. For the relics here, this is going to be exactly the same as early access server, so I'm not going to really go through that much. Brand new 4-piece, brand new 2-piece. Go for the outgoing healing chest, speed boots, HP percentage sphere, as well as the energy regeneration room. Now, outgoing healing is going to be the best in slot. It actually deals more damage and crit damage, like I mentioned before. Definitely a lot more synergistic since the entirety of Hyacine's kit is going to be dependent on the outgoing healing. So that is pretty much it for an overall summary for Hyacine. I'm just going to be skipping through the tracers as well as the mechanics. You can feel free to check out the early access video where you go through very in-depth on how her kit exactly works. I'm just going to jump straight into the calculations as well as some of the more interesting numbers that you guys might be more interested in. So how much benefit does Hyacine really bring to a Castorice team comp? So So you can see over here, we're going to be improving our Castorice rotations, which is how fast we generate products. We're going to be improving our Castorice multipliers, which is how much damage it's going to be dealing, as well as the fact that the E1 as well as Signature Light Cone does all consider as strong vertical investments to a Castorice team. So she is sort of like the perfect glue, the perfect bridge between Castorice as well as any potential sustain that might come up in the future, because the entire kit is perfectly designed to synergize with the entire team count that we've seen with Castorice, 3B, and RMC so far. And I'm not really gonna keep repeating this because we've already seen how synergistic she's gonna be performing. So let's just jump into the actual numbers itself and see what are the comparisons between herself as well as some of the other sustains over here, namely Luocha as well as Lingsha, right? So this is gonna be Hyacine's table over here. This is gonna be Castorice skill, Hyacine's ultimate, Baby Ica, as well as the 9 times you're gonna be getting hit, right? So every single time you're gonna be seeing, we are gonna be regenerating 43.7 Newbud, and then Hyacine is gonna be 19%, Hyacine ultimate is 23.5%, Little Ica is 4.7%. This is gonna be the frequency, so 1.7 times, 2 times, 0.8 times, or 5 times. Then this is gonna be the total energy regeneration or Newbud regeneration per cycle, and this is gonna be the combined total ratio towards the entire rotation between who contributed towards the Newbud generation. So generally speaking, we are gonna be taking a grand total of 43.9% from Castorice skill, Hyacine's E as well as ultimate combined total of a 33.5%, Little Ica at 13.8%, and then getting hit is gonna be 8.8%. Every single time we are gonna be getting roughly 169% Newbud generation, and we are gonna be getting an ultimate at roughly 59 action value every single time, right? So we are going to be taking a look at Luocha. So all of these numbers is going to be exactly the same. So the same table, same frequency. We are going to be getting a roughly 145% Newbud generation, or roughly 68.93 action value for every single Castorice ultimate. And then lastly, this is going to be for Lingsha, 150% Newbud generation for 1 ultimate every 66.78 action value. And this is going to be the grand summary, which shows that Hyacine is going to be essentially vastly, not really vastly, but definitely a substantial upgrade compared to Luocha and Lingsha in terms of how often can we charge up Castorice Newbud generation to some pullouts, right? So it's going to be 1.69 for Hyacine, 1.45 for Luocha, and 1.5 for Lingsha. So generally speaking, we are going to be 17% faster than Luocha as well as 13.2% faster than Lingsha over here. Also, keep in mind, this 1.69 number is going to be a little bit conservative because we have the additional added target of getting hit from Ica, which means that because we have one more target from Ica, there's a little bit more likelihood that the enemies are going to hit more targets, especially in an AoE environment. So we could even see this number going up a little bit higher, and this is going to be very prevalent, for example, in modes such as Pure Fiction. Just a quick little reminder, Gallagher's performance in terms of the environment in which you can apply your debuff, which is going to be Besotted debuff, consistently against an enemy target, he's actually going to be giving us more battery even compared to Luocha. But in an environment in which you cannot maintain a Besotted debuff, for example, multi-wave content, Pure Fiction, then Luocha is going to be able to out-generate enough value compared to Gallagher himself. So all of these numbers, they are not just going to be tested from just on paper, they also took it out to the simulated environments in Memory of Chaos, Pure Fiction, and the actual in-game testing to find out exactly how fast can we generate Castorice Newbud charges. So in this case, something that's quite interesting is that if we are going to be changing out 3B into Runmei, then Luocha's energy regeneration is going to vastly drop down because we are not going to be getting enough hits from 3B, right? Because 3B has a lot of follow-up attacks, a lot of ultimate attacks, which can generate Luocha's outgoing healing field to generate health for our entire team. So the moment you take away 3B and slot in a Runmei herself is actually not going to hit anywhere near as often as 3B, which does result to a lot lesser healing for your Newbud generation in terms of Castorice if you're going to be still running Luocha. But fortunately for Hyacine, this is not going to be that big of a concern even if you swap out 3B into Runmei, because Hyacine's heals are not dependent on your units hitting themselves. As long as Hyacine herself is going to be there providing the heal and Newbud for Castorice, then she's going to be able to generate this amount of value in order to charge your products for Castorice herself. So it's not going to be as reliant on running 3B in the entire team together. So one of the important aspects as to why Hyacine is so useful for Castorice is that you could potentially replace the slot of 3B to open up the 3B slot into your team 1 with, for example, D Herta over there. Not to say that 3B is no longer good with Castorice, absolutely not. She's still absolutely the best in slot support for Castorice, but it's just that they are so synergistic to the point where they're so strong right now, you could even consider moving 3B to make your other team even stronger, because now you can open up this potential slot, for example, like a Runmei, because Hyacine is just going to be that synergistic with Castorice herself. Generally speaking, you can see that even at the E1 Runmei, her performance is still going to be lower than the E0 S0 3B, because break efficiency, break effect, as well as action value delay, they are actually anti-synergistic with Castorice because you want the enemy to hit you as often as possible. It's just that because these two are going to be synergizing so well, you can still maintain a pretty good performance even without 3B. Now, all these theoretical calculations, they are going to be based on the fact that we are letting go of our Dragon, our Poleaxe every single time. We're not going to be holding and using Castorice just spam her enhanced skill at all. Every single time the Dragon will let go of the full blast, which is going to be the 自爆流. This is going to be the alternative, which is you actually want the Dragon to be on field and want Castorice to spam her skill. But in terms of this method of playing Castorice, because every single time you swipe with an enhanced skill, you can actually heal a Dragon by quite a considerable amount of health. Generally speaking, you're not going to feel that big of an impact if you were to add Hyacine or don't add Hyacine, so her meaning is not going to be that impactful. You're going to be playing this route. But at the end of the day, most players shouldn't even be considering of using the enhanced skill anymore, because the addition of Hyacine greatly promotes the entire damage output for running the Poleaxe going full burst every single time. Another thing to keep note over here, outside of the energy regeneration, which is how fast you want to cycle Poleaxe, is going to be the actual damage multiplier. So you can see over here, we are raising our entire HP by 30%, as well as a 600 flat amount in terms of the traits over here, which provides to a roughly 1,470 additional HP. So a 9,000 HP Castorice is going to be a 16.3% overall HP increase, which is going to be translated purely into output in terms of damage, right? And then for 3B, it's going to be a 23% increase, which is also going to be scaling with HP yourself. So both of them combined to one, your entire team from this trace alone, not including the additional charges you're getting from the Poleaxe, is going to be a team-wide increase of 18%, right? This is going to be a team-wide increase of 18%. And aside from this, Hyacine herself also has her own damage multipliers, which is going to be, as you guys have seen at the earlier patch, it's going to be 10% of the entire team's damage output. So if you want to compare it, okay, maybe 10% is not going to be that crazy. For Luocha, it's only going to be at 2%, and for Gallagher, it's only going to be at 3%, right? So this shows that Hyacine herself, the damage that she's outputting is going to be a lot more, in fact, 5 times higher than Luocha, and slightly more than 3 times higher than Gallagher himself. So Hyacine's personal damage is also going to calculate into a roughly 8% team-wide damage increase just from the personal damage from Ica alone. So from all these 3 factors combined into one, which is going to be how fast you're going to be charging Poleaxe, how much more damage you're going to be dealing with Poleaxe as well as 3B, and how much damage that Ica and Hyacine is going to be dealing themselves, it is going to be a roughly 40% overall increase for the entirety of a Castorice team. Even if it's going to be against an energy environment where you don't really need the energy regeneration anymore because you can always achieve a 100% uptime, it is still going to be a 25% final damage increase, which means that in this kind of environments, especially for example pure fiction, Hyacine could bring about a huge amount of energy regeneration for Castorice, because we are getting a lot of outgoing healing and a lot of enemy targets to hit for our Castorice Dragon, right? So if you see over here, if you replace E0 S0 Hyacine with E0 S0 Luocha, this is gonna be 勉强 roughly hit 40k, and if you do it with Hyacine, it's gonna be hitting 40k easily with 1 turn remaining. So no matter from a perspective of outgoing healing, in terms of multipliers, in terms of environment, in terms of mechanics, every single aspect from Hyacine has points to the perfect combination with Castorice. I would say that she's gonna be strongly, extremely, fervently, 强烈推荐. It's very high value for players that want to pull for a Castorice investment over here. Now with that being established, which other vertical investment for Hyacine should player consider? E1 or S1? And I think we've really talked about this a little bit more before, but for E1 and S1, let's just take a look at the actual numbers that's going to be calculated by CN community to put into perspective a little bit clearer as to which one brings more benefits, right? So over here you can see this is a differential between E1 S0 Hyacine as well as E0 S1 Hyacine. So this is going to be a single time of regenerating. This is going to be the frequency. Every single regeneration is the energy regeneration is basically Newbud. So every round amount of Newbud you're getting, as well as the ratio, overall combined total Newbud generator. So for E1 S0 Hyacine, the combined total Newbud is going to be 220% for a 45.54 action value for every single Poleaxe. And then you can see over for E0 S1 Hyacine, it's going to be a 205% energy regeneration for 48.67 action value needed for every single Poleaxe, which does prove back in my early access video as well, E1 S0 Hyacine is going to be more impactful than the E0 S1 Hyacine if you are going to be strictly talking about how quickly can you get products in the entire team, right? So you can see over here, this is going to be the recommendation. E0, S0, we are getting 59 action value for 1 Pollux. For Castorice, E1, S0 is 45.54, E0, S1 is 48.67, and the entire generator, you can see the damage output is going to be almost identical. Generally speaking, the final conclusion, if you're thinking about a vertical investment for a Castorice team, then E1 is going to be more worth it compared to the signature weapon, but just keep in mind that E1 is at the end of the day more expensive compared to the S1, right? So if you are able to stomach the fact that you might lose a 50-50, then you are okay with going for all in for Castorice, then E1 is going to be a little bit more valuable, right? But even with all this being said, S1 itself, since it's going to be quite cheap and we are going to be getting 3.1 in the future, and you can use this S1 alongside your other teams. So for any reason, if you're going to be taking Hyacine out for another team comp, such as My Day, Blade, Acheron, or even potentially give you the RMC, then S1 is going to be a little bit more valuable over there, right? One more small thing before we bounce off from this topic, which is, should you guys consider pulling an E2 Hyacine? So for E2 Hyacine, it's going to be a 30% speed buff, which translates into 33 speed or 33 outgoing healing percent because of the talent, which means that because of this 30% speed buff, we are going to be help us dealing more damage for Hyacine, as well as more outgoing healing, which translates into faster generation of products itself for the entire team, right? But that being said, it is ultimately still going to be an E2, and the impact is nowhere as close to compared to the E1 itself. So if you guys do have the spare pools, then sure, go for it, but otherwise, generally not that crazy. No matter what it's going to be, in a Castorice team, you'll absolutely find value by pulling Hyacine over here. So that was the entire topic about Castorice team. Now let's talk about some other team clones that players might consider running Hyacine with aside from Castorice. First of all, being My Day. Now, this is going to be bluntly speaking, the synergy between Hyacine and My Day is definitely going to be limited despite having the damage increase, because he needs a strong single target healing, like I've mentioned multiple times in my videos as well. So against a AoE environment, right, the AoE heals that Hyacine is going to be providing, My Day is never going to be able to reach full HP as often as he should, because Hyacine doesn't have that strong single target heal. At the same time, the amount of additional HP that Hyacine gives to My Day, the benefit is not going to be that high, especially if you're going to be converting from a damage multiplier's perspective, because the most important thing is for a Gallagher investment into My Day, this saves you up that one cost that you would have put for Hyacine to any other vertical investment, such as, for example, E1 Tribi or E1 My Day himself, while still maintaining Gallagher in the sustain slot. So in this case, if you are thinking about vertical investments for a My Day team, then the Hyacine's value is not going to be that significant, right? And then for a D-Herda team, I would say that for D-Herda, the amount of energy regeneration that Hyacine and Ica provides is going to be quite substantial, especially because Ica does have a pretty high frequency and it synergizes quite well with Tribi as well. And in fact, this is going to be one of the better sustains that Herda is going to be facing. However, generally speaking, the sustain slot's impact for Herda is not going to be as impactful compared to Castorice, because for Hyacine as well as Castorice, we know that Castorice will always want to run a sustain, whereas for D-Herda, she's never really that much tied to the outgoing healing as well as the comfort. Now, even though it is true that Hyacine gives you a lot more sustain, a lot more flexibility, basically having a greater quality of life in terms of overall sustain, Herda doesn't really exactly need that, especially because if you want to think about the energy regeneration a perspective, even though Hyacine helps Herda a little bit in terms of the additional energy regenerator, it is not going to be a game-changing sustain slot, because we can always take a look into other slots in terms of, for example, at Nexstar, instead of J, and we're still going to be running a different sustain slots for D-Herda, then it is still going to perform at a very, very close caliber. Generally, it is more like a comfort and quality of life upgrade compared to Luocha or Gallagher than last time. So aside from the damage output, in terms of the overall durability and the overall HP, you could just simply just opt for the Lingsha, because Lingsha also gives you a lot of charge in terms of the bunny, and in fact, Lingsha even cleanses a little bit more than Hyacine herself, right? And then next up is gonna be Blade. Now, the damage increase for Blade is definitely gonna be there, 70% final damage increase, but overall, I would say that because Blade's multiplier is still very, very low, and until we see for a fact that the version 3.4 buffs, what exactly do they have in store for Blade, it is not gonna be that important for Blade mains to pull Hyacine right now, until we see exactly how this is going to be changing going forward in the future, right? Now, with the S1, it is also going to be very, very important for Blade as well as Acheron, right? The E0 S1, first of all, it gives Blade the stacks, and second of all, it also gives Acheron the stacks, because the S1 does contribute to the 18% vulnerability. Now, for this Acheron, it's going to be a pretty decent increase in overall sustain, as well as the stack generations from Slash if you do have the S1, but it's going to be a little bit similar to Blade in the sense that the multiplier multiplier increase that Hyacine is providing to both Aircraft and his blade is not going to be that impactful, right? Their kits are not tied to the sustain slot. They are not relying on Hyacine to increase their overall damage numbers by that much in terms of, especially if you want to compare it to Castorice. So generally speaking, you might want to consider waiting for other sustain slot or other vertical investment slots to make them a lot stronger going forward. Alright, now we have come to the final part of the analysis, which is going to be the Eidolon increase for overall Hyacine itself. So E1 is basically a roughly 50% additional max HP, and every single time we are going to be getting a little bit of a sustain back whenever any ally attacks. This is going to be a 14% increase for Castorice, as well as 32% increase in the overall rotation speed, which translates to a roughly 30% final damage increase for a Castorice slot, right? Aside from that, a main purpose for this Eidolon is going to be the sustain, as well as the potential to generate a little bit more skill points, because now you don't really need to spam skill every single time, especially in the form of outside of Castorice. You basically just want her to keep your team alive. So for the E2, is going to be a very straightforward 30% speed buff, lasting for 2 turns for basically your entire team, right? So unfortunately, Huan over here got power crap by the 12%, so it is what it is. But let's just be real, Huan is E1, right? So I'll give her a little bit of a chance. No matter how this is going to be increasing, we are going to be getting a lot of value, because 30% speed on 2 turns is pretty significant. But keep in mind that it is still going to be quite likely you'll lose this buff, especially with a lot of action value advances or bonus turns. So it might not be that perfect, because if you're going to be getting an extra turn and you don't lose any HP, then the speed buff actually goes away, and it might also affect your speed tuning, for example, in Glare and all kind of stuff, right? So generally speaking, without a Castorice team, so if you're thinking of pulling for Hyacine outside of Castorice, it is recommended to get the S1 first before going for the E2, despite the 30% speed buff, right? Because the S1 pretty much have 100% buff uptime. And then for the E4 and E6, you can see over here, E4 is going to be an 80% crit damage buff. E6 basically quadruple this damage number, so just basically getting the big booms. This is going to be dealing 3 times higher damage at E6 compared to all of our previous items, which is going to be a roughly 200% damage increase on top of a 20% res pen, which everybody know by now is a classic res pen, right? So with that, we have come to the end of CN unit analysis for Hyacine. In summary, I don't think I need to glaze this any more than I should. If you are a Castorice main, she's absolutely phenomenal. If you're not a Castorice main, she's not going to be too bad of a quality of life upgrade compared to our other DPSs like Mighty, Blade, Icron, etc. But we could see a potential other slots in the future. And in terms of E1, S1, E1 is going to be a little bit more, S1 is going to be a little bit cheaper, and S1 is going to be a little more versatile, right? So word of the day is going to be big. Use code POKE for 10% off gamers subs. Use code POKE for 10% off gamers subs. Use code POKE for 10% off gamers subs. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, join Twitter. All the best, guys. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care.